that rattle my cage, yes, I do, believe it or not, or metaphorically speaking, have one. But I can't see the social or, in fact, the economic argument in support of student loans. I can't. This isn't an emotional issue for me. I'm not at college, so I have no vested interest in arguing against it. Neither do I have any kids at college or anything like that. No, this argument against student loans is powered simply by logic, political and social expediency, and common sense. As many of you know, as of July the 1st, student loan rates doubled. Both parties have been forced to go back to the drawing board as they couldn't agree on a compromise. Surprise, surprise. The Democrats wanted the loan rates frozen for another 10 years, whereas, of course, the Republicans would rather leave those rates pegged on the performance of the markets and the economy. So, not only shifting responsibility away from the democratically elected officials, but also leaving your future in the hands of others, which, by the way, includes foreign nationals, which have no vested interest whatsoever in seeing your future brighter than that of their own kids. Cynical viewpoint maybe, but fact. What's also a sticking point in the cost of the compromise, which the Congressional Budget Office estimates at $22 billion if the status quo remained. What I'd like to know is, who's making all that money? Certainly not the students, but yep, you guessed it, the big financial institutions. So as usual, the politicians can't get their act together, and who ends up paying for that? You do, the students. How is that fair? It isn't. That being said, we should apply the same financial discipline to politicians as we do in our everyday lives. This isn't their money, yet we're allowing them to spend it like it is. It's your money. A very different story if it were coming out of their own pockets. For example, if you're ever late with a credit card payment or loan, what happens? Yep, you get whacked with a huge amount of fees. Just like you, politicians should get penalized for doing the same. In other words, they should have a percentage of their salary deducted every time they miss an important date, such as this one, and fail to act. Why should you be left standing holding the bill? And no, it's not okay to say that we have an opportunity or an option to kick them out of office every 2 to 4 years. People have bills to pay and have to survive hand to mouth. Discussion, counter-discussion, feasibility studies, focus groups, lobbies, research, etc. takes time, and time is what people simply don't have. Politicians are only too easy and quick to bail out the banks because it would mean the collapse of the capitalistic system. But when it comes to students, it's a different story altogether. It's a problem they can deal with further down the line. So not only ignoring the responsibility, but putting a time bomb on America's finances. Great work, guys. What if mortgage rates were double, or the lending rates, or how about the interest charged by credit card companies, or car loans, or in fact any loan were to double? Do you think there would be a national outcry? Of course there would. Do you think Congress would act to avert any potential financial disaster? Yes, they would. Not only because it affects them directly, but because it causes financial problems and has a ripple effect on the economy as a whole. But also, the impact such measures would have on the grown-ups directly would affect the performance of the economy. But just how perverse a notion is it then to say to a child, you have to pay for your own education, and by the way, not having an education is not an option. You have to attend school. So you're screwed if you do, and guess what? You're screwed if you don't. Because, as we all know, education is a path to a better way of life. Trying to get a decent job without college qualifications is tough enough without having to be burdened with paying off a bad debt. With what? Given the option of having a college education and facing an average student debt of near $28,000, or having zero debt and standing by the sidelines, watching those who can afford college education move up the prosperity ladder, which do you think the politicians would have you choose? Of course, you're going to go for the college if you get the grades and believe it's the way to a better and brighter future. Who wouldn't? And that's precisely my point. The politicians know that and have said it comes at a cost. By introducing student loans, college undergraduates have effectively taken away the headache of balancing the books for the grown-ups. Some whiz kid somewhere, and I do mean that in a totally derogatory manner, by the way, came up with the notion of actually letting students pay for their own education and removing the government's role altogether in helping millions of young Americans across the country through education. Just how ridiculous is that notion? On the one hand, the politicians wash their hands of financially helping students and ignoring the issue. And then when it comes to doubling the student rates, guess what? They get all involved to the point of lapse. It's like giving someone a blank check or putting the lunatics in charge of the asylum. Politicians have a very short-term memory. They got to where they were by being elected by the people. Very important to remember that. In fact, I would happily challenge any politician out there to argue the merits of student loans in any forum or arena anytime. So, consider this an open invitation. Okay, so now that we've got the economic and social rationale for not allowing the student status quo to continue. One, currently the debt for the student leaving college stands at near $28,000. That's even before he or she has found a job, apartment, car, budget to live on, necessities, etc. Two, taking the spending power away from students who graduate will have an effect on cash flow in the economy. The knock-on effect of that will be job losses, increase in social benefits, increase in taxes, increase in unemployment, less goods and services being produced at source, increase in imports of cheaper foreign goods, increase in the balance of payments, a decrease in the value of the dollar, postponed inevitable impact on inflation. Shall I go on? 3, increasing the debt for students only prolongs the problem, the economy, both in the short and long term, as I've just described. Increasing the debt ceiling for students will have a knock-on effect for financial institutions both here, at home, and abroad by increasing the risk in terms of financing that debt, postponing that debt and making money out of interest charge. In other words, think of what happened to Fannie Mae in the subprime lending. 5, by levying a huge financial burden on students and the economy as a whole, by the way, we're effectively taking money from the poor and giving it to the rich. From students to the banks and financial institutions. Let's face it, we aren't allowed to hoard money under our mattresses anymore, but instead have to use financial institutions to carry out our business or day-to-day activities, personal or otherwise. There's a catch there somewhere, and we're all being forced to use a system which is by its very nature geared against us. This isn't some conspiracy theory. Just start thinking for yourself and start to unravel the facts. 6, by creating an artificial debt, because that near $1.1 trillion actually doesn't exist as tangible money, you can't touch or feel it, for their students' accounts. We're looking at finding a solution if students fail to meet payments or become unrealistic to do so. Africa is a good example. There, the countries loaned billions by the International Monetary Fund and World Bank simply couldn't afford to pay those institutions back because the debt, guess what, was overwhelming and was structured in a way which made it somewhat difficult for those countries to sustain their economies. Thank you, Motorbike. The debt was written off and restructured so that they could afford to pay the money back. By the way, that current debt stands at $200 billion, and servicing that debt every year costs African nations $14 billion. So those are just some of the economic arguments. I don't think I need to really delve into the social and moralistic arguments against student loans. At the end of the day, if it's important enough, we can always find the money for education. After all, we're talking about the future of this great nation. And what could be more important than that? I know for one, I want my kids, or wouldn't want my kids rather, living in a hovel somewhere struggling to survive, penny pinching to buy bare necessities or essentials. Isn't that the whole reason why many adults work so hard so that their kids wouldn't have to endure the hardships they once did? No. I would rather see commerce and industry and the elected government of the day take responsibility. They wanted the job. Now get on with it. As always, I'd very much like to hear your views on this subject, or if there's anything you've seen in the news recently or would like us to cover here on the show, then you can email me on the program. Just go to spotlightamericatv.com. But until next time, from me, Actor Khan, and the rest of the team here on the show, goodbye and thanks for watching.